All right, so today we're going to be doing a little bit different of a toy as far as the grown-up toy line goes. Today we're going to be looking at the evolution that I've noticed between the P38, which eventually then became the P1, into the Beretta 92 series. So the weapons that we're going to be looking at today, this right here is a Walther produced P38, World War II vintage. This is a 1943 AC. So right during the height of the war, this firearm was produced. Going into the Beretta line, this right here, which is a Beretta 92S. This is a Italian police pistol. These were in production for quite some time. Even when the F models came out, there were still some of these getting cranked off the assembly line. So we're going to see how it rolls into that. And then the highest in the line, which it's basically the same as the 92S functionally wise, but the Beretta M9A3. This one is equipped with an O light, so very bright light there. So we're going to go ahead right now, and for all you safety Nazis, we'll go ahead and clear it. So what you saw pop out there, not a real round, so don't freak out. This is a snap cap. I've got a mag with a couple of snap caps in it just so we can go through the function. All right. So let's go ahead and start from the beginning. We've got our Walther P38, which is a single action, double action. So when it's cocked here, we're in single action. When it's not cocked and we're in fire, it is a double action. So you've got the long trigger pull that will cock and then release the hammer. Obviously, any subsequent shot, it is going to maintain the hammer at the rear for single action for a very short trigger pull. This is an incredibly modern firearm for 1943. The only thing that would stop this from meeting the classification that a lot of people like to throw out there of the Wonder Nines is that it's a single stack magazine. So, as you can see here, single stack magazine, very, very thin, which grip opening, very thin. We have a bottom tilting mag release. So when the firearm has a magazine in it, to unload, we put our thumb here, we tilt back, strip the magazine free. Definitely an older, more European style of stripping a magazine, where today we do the thumb stuff. But back then, magazines weren't as plentiful as they are now. So you most likely had the same couple of magazines, maybe 2 or 3, that you had for your firearm. So you didn't want to just drop that on the ground and move forward. You wanted to strip that out and hold it so that you can reload it and use it later, because Lord knows the next time that you're going to come by a magazine. So doctrinally wise, much different. Supply chains were much different. So that's why we see the difference in magazine release, in my opinion. So we have a locking block that's actually visible on this right here. The firearm disassembles very quickly. So with us locked back, we will go ahead here, and rotate the disassembly lever into the forward position, where we then can drop the slide, pull our trigger, and strip off the frame. Push that locking block into the down position. She pops out. Oh, there is the falling locking block and plunger. We will keep this disassembled and go off to the side, where we now roll in to the Beretta 92S. So, same single action versus double action mode. Other thing that I failed to get on the Walther, but it's got this decocking lever. So decocking and safety all in one. If it is on fire with a round chambered, you can go ahead and hit the decocker there, and it will drop the hammer safely. So that same overall function on the Beretta 92S, where if it is in fire, we can go ahead and safely drop that trigger. It also fully deactivates the trigger, so there's nothing that could get into the trigger guard and accidentally make it fire or anything like that. It is fully mechanically not connected to the firing pin any longer. Well, not connected to the hammer any longer. So, disassembly on this, very similar, almost the same location. So we've got a plunger on this side of the weapon here, and then this lever on the other side. And we will go ahead and lock it to the rear. We will push our button. We will rotate our disassembly lever, and we then can come forward, pull our trigger, slide the frame off. So if we look now, frame to frame, very similar in design. The big difference obviously being the double stack magazine in the Beretta, but we've got two hammers. Giant difference between these two is going to be the recoil springs. We have a dual spring that is in the P38 that is included into the grip frame. On the 92, we have moved that into a recoil spring located underneath the barrel, as you can see there, whereas that wouldn't be possible in the P38 with this part of the barrel exposed. So to continue the disassembly on the 92S, we will go ahead and pull our recoil spring out and guide rod. All right. Barrel with locking block. So now if you want to see the immense similarities between these two, very, very similar operating system. The Beretta obviously pulls a lot of design influence in that regard from the P38. So that is field stripped. We will go ahead and reassemble here, get it back together. Put our recoil spring guide rod, barrel. Go ahead and line up our frame rails. Pull it on. We will lock it back to the rear, and then we will rotate our disassembly lever back. Now we can drop the slide. Reassembled. Another thing to definitely keep in mind here, we still have the heel mag release. So it is a button on the 92S as opposed to the lever that was on the P38. But what I want to show you now, we'll go ahead and get the P38 reassembled as well. So very simple as far as the P38 goes. And get our barrel and slide assembly together and get it on to the frame rails. lock her back, rotate our disassembly lever, and we can go ahead and drop the slide. Now, one thing that I will note here real quick, when you hit the decocker on the Beretta, it resets the trigger to the forward position. So, you cock the hammer there, it goes to the rear. If we hit our decocker, it immediately pops that trigger forward. On the P38, if we hit our decocker, the trigger stays forward while we're in the safe position until we rotate to fire, which it then kicks it forward. So, teeny bit of a difference there, but not too drastic. I know when I was looking at P38s, I saw a couple of pictures online that had me very confused because I had Berettas before I had a Walther, where I would see them like this. So you see it obviously on safe, but the trigger is to the rear, and the hammer has fallen. So that confused me, but it's just a design difference in the P38 versus the Beretta. We'll go ahead and lock our actions open, and I will show you how remarkably similar these two firearms are. Now, if we look and see our different locking surfaces, we can look at the lengths. They are damn near identical. And here's something that I really didn't anticipate you being able to do. But we will take our P38, put it down on the table. I will take my 92S and sit it on top of the P38. And now we can take a look and see that the Walther basically disappears underneath the silhouette of the 92. So, very interesting there. They are dimensionally incredibly close, and the biggest difference between the two that you feel is the biggest difference in the design, which is the double stack magazine. The grip is very thick on a Beretta 92. I don't have the biggest hands in the world, so it's a little bit uncomfortable for me to grip. I was in the United States Army, and I did carry a Beretta 92 FS, or M9, same thing, when I was overseas. And the grip frame thickness was by far the worst part of it, but I was used to that when I got the 92S, which I ended up picking up because they were very cheap at the time. I got this one for $279. So, a all-metal, Italian-made Beretta 9mm double stack pistol for sub $300. I couldn't pass it up. So, that's why I got that. Now, moving along, we've seen the difference between the P38 and the 92S. So now we will roll in to the final evolution. Well, I guess not final, because Beretta hasn't discontinued the 92 by any means. They're still cranking out a ton of them, but in an attempt to keep the U.S. Army contracts, Beretta came out with the M9A3, which there was a little bit of pushback from the Army, as they didn't like that they went with the A3 designation for something that hadn't been adopted. So that was a little bit of sand kicked into the face of the Army for that, as far as they saw it. But Beretta did a ton of improvements to the M9, ones that made it adequate to where I believe they should have simply adopted the M9A3 instead of going with the SIG. All of the armorers in the Army would have already been very well trained on the overall fundamentals of the M9A3, since the M9 is the same operating principle. Magazines would have been interchangeable, so we would have been able to continue to use all that stuff. A lot of the spare parts would be the same. Triggers, springs, all that kind of stuff. But this is what I'm talking about, M9A3. So, some key differences that we will see between this and the 92S. So if we look, a different designed safety lever. It is the same style of safety decocker. Now, they do make a G model that automatically returns it to the fire position. I like that I can put it on safe. A lot of people like that it will automatically drop the hammer and then go back to fire. But I personally like this one, which is why this is the model that I bought. But on the other side of the 92S, no lever. So you cannot engage the safety or the hammer drop on the 92S from the other side, whereas on the Beretta, you absolutely can. It's ambidextrous. You have controls on both sides. And one of the big improvements on the M9A3, if you can see the upswept part of the decocker, is supposed to be so that when you are manipulating the slide, you are far less likely to manipulate it, engage the safety as you drop it, like I just did, or you would have just racked it, put it on safe, and now you have a dead trigger. So I personally have not had that problem I didn't have it with my M9 in combat. I did not have it with the 92S at any time, but it is a design improvement. So we also now have the more American style thumb magazine drop. So it is a drop free, where you're not stripping it from the firearm as you would back in the day. Magazines are not nearly as hard to come by anymore. I don't know about any of you other vets out there, but when I got out of the Army, I must have had 20, 25 M9 magazines. So it definitely wasn't difficult to come by them, so you didn't necessarily have to care so much in the field. We have a threaded barrel so that you can accept suppressors. We have a rail on the underside, which, as you saw before, has the O-Light on it, which this is an O-Light PL Mini. Some people aren't a fan of that on a full-size gun. I personally think the smaller the better. I don't want to add a ton of weight to the front of it. And while it is stubby and doesn't come anywhere near coming to the end of the barrel, I enjoy that about it. I think it's nice. Now, the big complaint that I had on my Beretta in combat with the Beretta 92S was the grip. Now, the Beretta M9A3 has what's called a Vertec grip, where you can see this flat back, where we've got a very curved back strap on the 92 series. It is much nicer in the hand. You get a much better purchase on it if you have smaller hands like I do. So, operating principle, though, remains the same. We've got the same overall operating mechanism between the 92S and the M9A3. Very similar. One thing that a lot of people value, I necessarily haven't really seen much of a problem with it. There is a plastic guide rod on the M9A3. There is a metal guide rod on the 92S. Now, a lot of people will upgrade and switch their M9s or 92FSs or M9A3s to the metal guide rod. I personally couldn't care less. It's a very negligible difference, in my opinion, as far as reliability or anything like that. I never saw a plastic one break in the field. I never saw a metal one break in the field. I've never heard of anyone breaking one at the range. All it does is guide a spring. So I don't see the big deal there. The only time I could possibly imagine it being an issue is if you were to quickly put hundreds of rounds through the pistol and heat became an issue and it warped or melted. I can't imagine any scenario in which someone would put that kind of round count through one so quickly, but I suppose in theory it could happen. So that's the difference between all these guns, which I think shows a very clear lineage between the P38, the early Beretta 92, and the more modern iteration of the M9A3. So last but not least, we're going to go ahead and compare some weights. So, got my trusty scale here. I'll go ahead and turn her on. We will go unloaded on all of these, and I will take the light off of the M9A3. Now, Walther P38. We are at 30.65 ounces. Unloaded. Now we are unloaded, of course, as well on our Beretta 92. Throw her on here at 29.88 ounces. So very interesting that the P38 is a little bit heavier. The big thing that I would say there is this is a steel slide steel frame, where the later Walther P1s became a steel slide and an aluminum frame. The Beretta is a steel slide aluminum frame. So I had figured that the difference between the slides would make up for the weight between the frame on the P38 and the frame on the M9 or 92 series, whatever you want to call it. So that's interesting to me. I figured that the 92 was going to be heavier, but it's not. Surprise. So I'm going to the M9A3. We'll strip the light off of it. Throw it on the scale. 29.45 ounces. So basically the same weight between the two Berettas, and a very, very small amount more on the old dog grandpa 1943 P38. So I don't know if you can see the markings there, if it would focus on them. You can kind of see it, but it's a 1943 AC P38. I hope you guys enjoyed the video here. Just a couple of quick comparisons between 3 different handguns in my collection. If you guys want to see some other stuff, let me know. Got a good amount of firearms. One thing that I might be going into in the future would be the other World War II Powers handguns, as I do have a 1911 and a Tokarev. So we could compare the differences in those. Now, the P38 is an actual World War II issue handgun, brought back, no import marks, so this would have been a soldier's bring back from the war. My Tokarev is absolutely not a World War II, it is a 1950s production, so a lot different as far as that goes. And my 1911 is also not a World War II issue firearm. So I hope to be getting one of those at some point. The prices are astronomical, especially right now, so we'll see what happens on that in the future. I do have access, though, to a World War I 1911. So if I can get that, we will look into that, maybe do a video on it. But thanks for watching. I hope you enjoy.